At the University of Toledo, we are surrounded by experts. And we tap into those experts here on Rocket Talk.
Getting older is a fact of life, or is it? Now follow me here. A recent development in anti-aging science may mean we are closer to finding that elusive fountain of youth. Scientists administered a supplement, a mixture of proteins, to mice and extended their lifespans by 24% without any increased risk of cancer or other health problems. Now this may sound like science fiction, but it's science. It's happening now and of course raises lots of questions. We are here to get some answers today. Joining me to discuss, Drs. Madeline Muntersbjorn from the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies and Dr. Thyagarajan Subramanian, Professor of Neurology and Bioengineering and Senior Associate Dean for Research in UToledo's College of Medicine and Life Sciences. You say they call you Sub or Dr. Sub, and I appreciate that. Makes that a little easier on us. Thank you both so much for being here today. Dr. Sub, let's start with you. This study made quite a bit of headlines online when it came out just a few weeks ago. But is this clickbait, or are we really taking steps toward slowing the aging process and prolonging life?
So there's a lot of interesting findings in this particular paper. Many of the things that they looked at, such as oxidative stress, which is a way in which our body ages. What is the mechanism of aging? And then the issue of about free radicals. Free radicals are things that we produce in our body when we eat substances that are not well digested. You know, for example, if you consume alcohol or eat other kinds of high-fat food, etc., then you get these nutritional toxicity. So they measured those things while giving glutathione supplements to these mice. So they actually looked at some good benchmarks. And yes, these benchmarks did change in a positive way. So that is a good sign. And furthermore, increasing the lifespan of ordinary mice by 24 weeks is a significant finding, because that would be the equivalent of another 10 years of life in most humans that you're able to increase by. So that's also a good indication. But having said all this, mice are mice. You know, humans are humans. So proving something in mice does not necessarily mean that that's going to apply for humans. And another important thing is that this was done in a laboratory setting. So, you know, laboratory mice, they have social limitations. It's not like wild mice that are out there. And if you were able to show that wild mice had this benefit, then that might be different. So when you're in a laboratory situation, everything is controlled. The environmental toxicity is controlled. What they eat and drink is controlled, right? So given a controlled environment, this is promising. This is interesting. But really, to make a big leap of faith to say that this is applicable to humans, that's a stretch.
So, Dr. Muntersbjorn, if this was applicable to humans, is this great news, something we should really be excited about here, or are we asking for trouble, especially when we're talking about prolonging life?
Well, when scientists ask questions about these medications, they focus on efficacy and toxicity. Does it work, and are there unnecessary side effects? But these questions are insufficient from a philosophical perspective that would ask us to consider questions of, say, fullness or fairness. Like questions of fullness, could everybody be taking these drugs and live longer such that we would eventually run out of resources? Could it be like the Kurt Vonnegut story where 6 generations crowd into a 1-bedroom apartment and no one has any privacy? But I think these depend upon an egalitarian imagination where everyone is taking these medications, and I think questions of fairness might be more urgent than questions of fullness, because we don't want new medications that only widen the disparities, the health disparities between wealthy people who have access to quality health care and poor people who do not.
And Dr. Sub, you mentioned this was just done in mice, it was in a controlled setting, but how quickly is the science evolving here? I mean, might we see you know, an injection or a pill or something in our lifetimes that could prolong life?
Yeah, so I think the interesting application that we're going to see for this is there are diseases in which there is premature aging. This is called progeria. Progeria is a disease where people get aging earlier than they are supposed to. It's an illness, right? So for those people, it's a treatment. And that would probably the most important application. And we hope that these treatments, and by the way, this is not a drug in per se, it's actually a nutritional supplement because it's glutathione, which is naturally present. Agreed that it will be commercialized as a pill or some substance for this. And again, the issues that Dr. raised about ethics, so on and so forth, will become applicable. For treating early aging, though, this may be a good way to get the bandwagon started. But eventually, once it's started, then you have to ask the question, will others start using it? And if so, how do we stop them from using it? That kind of question also comes up at that point. But for people who have premature aging, this is a great advance, and I think there will be advances in it. Of course, the next step would be to test it in, animals, other animal models, maybe larger species, to see whether it applies there, or is it only applicable to mice? And then maybe doing translational work in humans would be the next step. Yeah.
Doctor, you mentioned that short story. You sent that to me, and a lot of unintended consequences in that. Overpopulation, food shortages, and just a world where, respectfully, older people they don't die. People just keep living. What are some of the other unintended consequences if we're prolonging lives?
Well, again, the question of fullness, I think, really is one that asks us to imagine that everybody has access to these new supplements. When I think that in reality, who has access to these supplements? Is it going to be treating diseases like progeria, or is every athlete going to have a career as long as Tom Brady's now that they have access to these new snack foods or something like that? I think those are, like I said, two different questions.
And Dr. Sub, what are the greatest unintended consequences to the individual person if you can, make them healthier, maybe physically, but not mentally? I mean, we've all seen like Alzheimer's patients where physically they're strong, but mentally, they're struggling, and that can be dangerous. So talk a little bit about that.
Right. So aging itself increases your risk for many things. Neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, cancers, arthritis. All these things are higher when you're older, right? So just delaying aging itself is not sufficient. You also need to have wholesome health elsewhere. So sort of a youth potion is actually what we need. It's not really aging prevention, but actually keeping you young and fit and healthy so that your cells in your body don't degenerate or deteriorate. But then again, this raises ethical questions, as the professor just mentioned. But we have to have that balance, and that's where medicine has to come in conjunction with society and make some decisions where the ethical boundaries or where we need to stop and where we don't. But having said all that, the advances that we're making in medicine for all these things has benefits in many different areas, like this idea of glutathione preventing, for example, oxidative stress. That idea, that concept, will be helpful in patients who have Parkinson's disease, patients who have Alzheimer's disease, because there you can make quality of life difference by providing this. So the science itself is good. The consequences of the science has implications in many other areas beyond just the idea of reducing aging or making you live longer.
If this does become widely available or at least available to the people who can afford it, and people start using this for vanity's sake, what do you think the religious community, faith leaders, will say about this ability to just, keep living or reverse aging?
Well, I think that there's so many different faiths that there could be any number of responses. The response that I find most curious to me is what would be the sporting community's response. Is taking these anti-aging supplements going to be viewed as a kind of doping, or what every smart and well-equipped athlete's going to do to get a competitive edge?
Interesting. Dr. Sub, I want to give you the final word. We've got about a minute and a half left. For people, watching this, maybe this is the first time they've heard about this. What are the main takeaways? What should we remember?
The main takeaway is that science is making excellent progress in understanding what the basis of this. So the more we know, the better we understand the process of aging. And what hurts cells and how they grow older in time is an important question that we need to understand. So science is making advances. The consequences of that may not be as simplistic as simply saying, okay, we're going to let people live longer, but the actual benefits of it could be translated to a number of other diseases. One example that I already gave was progeria, or early aging. Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, other kinds of neurodegenerative disease could benefit from the science that comes from all this work that's happening. So overall, it's a good news for all of us because we are understanding more about what happens, and science always benefits people when properly utilized and not abused, right? So that's the bottom line, I think.
Well, we will leave it at that. Thanks to both of you for coming in today, and thanks to you at home for watching us. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time with more Rocket Talk from the University of Toledo.
Thank you.
Thank you.